Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ben Greenfield, and today I'm going to show you how to fix your guts based on the result of a gastrointestinal panel called a GI effects panel. So, if you read my article on bengreenfieldfitness.com entitled How to Get Rid of Traveler's Diarrhea, I talked about parasites and some nasty things that can happen in your gut. And at the time that I was going through everything that I talked about in that blog post, I went in to get a yearly test that I get. Now, the name of this test is a GIFX Comprehensive Profile. I will put a link to it underneath the video. I got mine from Direct Labs, but the way that it works is you get a stool kit sent to your home, and you basically do three, I'll use the nice word, purges on 3 separate days and collect multiple stool samples, and then you ship them off via like a prepaid FedEx label that comes with the stool test. So I'll put a link to this test underneath the video, but let's go ahead and look at the type of things that you find out when you do a test like this and some of the things that you can do to fix what you may find. So this is going to be good information for you if you get gas, constipation, bloating, insomnia, if you're concerned about parasites, yeast, fungus, if no matter how much you eat, you're always hungry. That is an issue that can be elucidated by this. If you get sick a lot, that's another thing. So really important test. I recommend everybody do it about once a year. So let's jump into really the first page. So what we get on the first page is we get a look at what are called the predominant bacteria in the digestive tract. So basically, bacteria play a major role in health in that they assist your immune system to be resistant against pathogenic organisms. They help you to digest and absorb food. They help you to produce vitamins, to produce what are called SFCAs or short chain fatty acids. They stimulate your immune system. They've got a lot of cool effects. And when you get this GI effects panel, they detect these via DNA analysis. Now, you can see when you look over my particular panel that I have low levels of what are called bacteroids and Clostridia. I also have low levels of something called Streptomyces and low levels of another bacteria. This is actually the good form of E. coli. Now, a lot of times when you get a test and you see that you have a low amount of some of the predominant bacteria, or let's say you don't have a panel that shows most of these values closer to the green range, it typically means that you might benefit from introducing a larger variety of fermented foods into your diet. Or you might be someone who has been on an antibiotics protocol and you've killed off some of those good bacteria in your gut, and you need to do something like get on like a therapeutic grade probiotic. Now, in my case, this particular panel was taken after about a month and a half or so of me doing a lot of intensive traveling where I wasn't eating a lot of those fermented foods, and I'm actually going to retest and do this test in 8 weeks after I use a combination of something called caprobiotics and then also another probiotic that I'll show you in the link underneath this video, kind of a full spectrum probiotic with another strain in it called Saccharomyces boulardii. I know they have all these weird names, but basically that should help a little bit with restoring what essentially you're looking at here, which is a bacterial imbalance in the gut. Now, I'll bet if we had looked at this panel at a time in my life when we were getting food from our garden and lactofermenting and doing all the stuff that we normally do, and not during a time of heavy travel, that these values would have been better. But I need to take into account these values because I do travel a lot. And it looks like maybe I need to do a better job eating a wide variety of fermented foods and using my therapeutic grade probiotic when I travel. So it's really interesting what you can see in terms of predominant bacteria. No issues with opportunistic bacteria in my digestive tract. No, like for example, H. pylori is one thing that you might see here. A lot of people deal with that. Opportunistic bacteria can really do a number on your digestive tract. They can cause heartburn. They can cause increased immune sensitivity. They're not parasites, but if you got a test like this, you might find out that you had opportunistic bacteria. in which case you could use some things that knock out bacteria, like berberine is one example, and I'll talk about berberine later because it also does a good job at knocking out yeast and fungus. So speaking of yeast and fungus, this particular GI panel will also tell you if you have a yeast or a fungus overgrowth. Now, about 6 months ago, I did a test for what's called small intestine bacterial overgrowth, or Sibo. Now, Sibo is very, very common among people who eat a lot of food. It doesn't have to be a high-carb diet full of starches. It can just be a hard-charging athlete like myself, or an Ironman athlete, or a CrossFitter, or somebody who exercises a lot and also, by definition, kind of eats a lot. You tend to see more issues with yeast and fungus. Now, you also tend to see issues with yeast and fungus with people who don't eat a lot, but just have a high amount of sugar and starches in their diet, or maybe, drink too much wine and beer and things of that nature, some of those fermented foods that tend to ferment. But you can see here, I have a kind of a yeast and fungus overgrowth. Now, when I did the breath test for small intestine bacterial overgrowth, I triggered kind of like medium to high in terms of the suggestion that I might have a small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Well, I didn't pay very close attention to that, to be honest with you, because I was more testing as kind of like an experiment. Well, I should have, because I definitely have a yeast and fungus overgrowth, and I've noticed in the past year or so that I've been having to spend a little bit more time on the toilet in the morning, frankly, and producing a large amount of stool. And that's one of the things that happens when you have a yeast and a fungus overgrowth. You also tend to crave carbs a little bit more when you have a yeast and a fungus overgrowth. Now, in my case, it's relatively large. So positive yeast and fungus overgrowths are defined as a +1, a +2, a +3, or a +4. And I'm a +3. So I actually met with my physician this morning on this particular panel that you're looking at. And we talked about some of the things that you can do. Now, you'll find out later that part of this panel shows you which things do a good job at killing yeast and fungus for your particular body and which things don't. And I found out some specific things that I need to start doing to knock out this yeast and fungus overgrowth, because this is not healthy. And the scary thing is a lot of people have this. So underneath this video, I'll put a link to the breath test that I did, but I'll also put a link, of course, to this current test that you're looking at, so you can kind of see how you might be able to look for a yeast and a fungus overgrowth. So another issue with Ben's gut. The next thing is really the true reason I tested, the issue that I came back from Asia with, and that was diarrhea and insomnia. Two specific things that indicate that you may have a parasite going on. And it turns out that I do indeed have a blastocystis hominis infection. This is something that you typically get from water, either drinking water or swimming in water that is dirty. I did quite a bit of that when I was in Asia. So I have a moderate blastocystis hominis parasite infection. This is not one of the good parasites, folks. This is one of the ones that you want to get rid of. And the scary thing is about 20 to 25% of the U.S. population gets parasites and has parasites detected in their digestive tract when they do this test. And if you ever deal with insomnia, constipation, diarrhea, gas, bloating, anything like that, even food cravings, or like say you're hungry no matter what, and you eat and eat and eat and you're still hungry, that can definitely be a sign that there's a parasite issue. And this is certainly the issue with me. I remember when I first got this, I started to crave foods like crazy, and no matter how much I eat, I wouldn't gain weight. I would just like poop more. I'm not trying to be nasty. I'm just telling you how it was. So really interesting. So have the blastocystitis thing too. We'll talk about what my physician and I discussed as far as how I can get rid of this, and some of the things that I also found out as far as what that particular parasite might be sensitive to. So it looks like I was negative for all the other kind of common parasites you tend to see, like Giardia and Cryptosporidium and some of these others. So the next thing that you see on a test like this is what's called an adiposity index. Now, the thing is, when you have an abnormality of certain compounds in your digestive tract, what are called phyla, and these are bacteria associated with fatty acids. What happens is you sometimes tend to have increased caloric extraction from food. You may have heard about studies that have shown that overweight and obese people have some issues with the bacterial balance in their gut. You typically see in people who are overweight high or low percentages or imbalances in firmicutes and bacteroidetes. So this is another one to look into. I'm fine as far as that goes. There's no issues there, but just kind of something that you should know that this will actually test for. It's called an adiposity index because these are associated with adipose tissue. Now, on the next page, we get to your beneficial SFCA, or short-chain fatty acids. Now, short-chain fatty acids are produced when dietary carbohydrates and fiber ferment in your gut. And this would be considered kind of a good form of fermentation, because what happens is when they ferment, they produce these fatty acids that get taken up to sustain the activity of cells, particularly in your colon. And butyrate, one of the short-chain fatty acids produced from fermentation of fiber and of polysaccharides, it actually lowers your risk of colitis and colorectal cancer. So you want a healthy balance of all of these. And you can see that there are a few issues with the short-chain fatty acid balance in my gut. For example, my total short-chain fatty acid count is low. And this is kind of interesting because I eat a lot of fiber. I have a decent amount of fiber in my diet. I eat a lot, I have like kale smoothies and stuff like that. And I also have low levels of acetate. I have high levels of another one called propionate. Probably what's going on here is that I need to adjust a little bit the type of fibers that I'm getting, and I need to consume a few more of the beneficial prebiotics, inulin, chicory root, things of that nature. And fortunately, the therapeutic grade probiotic that I have, the Caprobiotics, actually has all that stuff in there, but I've only been taking 2 to 4 of those a day, and it looks like I probably need to, for a period of time, for about the next 30 days or until I retest, I will bump up to a more therapeutic dose of that to try and feed the short chain fatty acids, because I'm getting enough fiber. It just looks like some of the specific prebiotics that I need, I'm not getting. So that's another one that this test will show you. Really interesting. Lactoferrin is an iron-binding protein that you tend to see very, very high levels of when you see people with irritable bowel syndrome, so like Crohn's and infection in the gut, because the lactoferrin is released to fight off that infection. So you want lactoferrin levels to not be super high. Interestingly, if you do have an infection, it can help to take lactoferrin, to actually use lactoferrin as a way to kind of clean up the gut. So, for example, colostrum, caprocolostrum is a form of colostrum I take that has lactoferrin in it, but that's a really good gut anti-inflammatory. But if your body's churning out a bunch of it on its own, it's a pretty good sign that there might be some inflammation going on in the digestive tract. Now, you can see that I have what's called high fecal SIgA. High fecal SIgA means that there is a definite immune system reaction going on in my gut. And in particular, fecal SIgA indicates that there's typically an immune system reaction to bacteria or yeast in the digestive tract. So for me, or for anyone else who happens to have high fecal SIgA, this is typically a sign that you've got a yeast or a fungus overgrowth and your body is responding to that. And of course, we know that I have a yeast or a fungus overgrowth based off of the data that you saw earlier. So the same thing that I can do to knock out that yeast and fungus overgrowth is something that I can use to take care of this high level of fecal SIgA. Okay. pH. The pH is pretty good. Okay, you want your pH somewhere between about 6 to 7 in that range. And pH is influenced by a lot of factors, but for example, you've got organic acids and ammonia in your digestive tract. You've got basically things like GI bleeding that can influence pH. Antibiotic use is going to influence pH, as will proton pump inhibitors like a hydrochloric acid inhibitor, like an antacid drug. You want to make sure that the pH in your digestive tract looks good. If my pH, for example, was very, very high, that might be an indication that I need to start using more hydrochloric acid or taking a digestif like lemon juice, for example, before I eat a meal. In my case, my pH is good, so no issues there, and I never get heartburn or anything like that, so that didn't come as a surprise to me that was okay. So then you get to your ability to digest foods efficiently, and one of the things that you see when you look at this are, number one, pancreatic enzymes. Now, my doctor wasn't too happy about this number. He likes to see levels that are significantly higher than 200 for pancreatic enzymes, and he highly recommended that I start into a pancreatic enzyme protocol. I'll link to what he recommended underneath this video, but usually when you have a pancreatic enzyme insufficiency, it can mean that you might have too much bacterial fermentation going on in your digestive tract. You might have some kind of a maldigestion or malabsorption issue related to that. And it's an issue that can be kind of fixed by jump-starting the enzyme production in your pancreas and beginning to use pancreatic enzymes. But this is something that I will address by using pancreatic enzymes for about the next month or so. So a lot of these fixes for gut issues, they're not like fixes for life, but they're just fixes to take care of some underlying issues, fix them, and then go on and live your life without spending a bunch of money on supplements. So triglycerides, high levels of triglycerides in the gut particularly would indicate fat maldigestion. Maybe you're not making enough lipase enzymes. Maybe you're eating the wrong kinds of fats. Maybe you're eating your fats too quickly and you're stressed out while you're eating. Anything like that might cause high gut triglycerides, but mine are fine. And it's interesting because I eat a very high fat diet, 60 to 80% fat, but that's fine. No fat malabsorption there. Putrefatic short chain fatty acids usually are a result of bacterial fermentation of undigested proteins. So if this number were very high, it would mean I'm not doing a very good job digesting proteins. And again, I might benefit from using like a hydrochloric acid supplement before I eat, or like a digestive enzyme complex that has like bromelain and papain and some of the things that will help to break down fiber in it. So those are some of the things. If vegetable fibers were high, by the way, that would indicate maldigestion. I'm fine as far as vegetable fibers go as well. So next, we're almost done here with this stuff before we get into how to know what things you might be sensitive to that could help you fix some of these issues. So high long-chain fatty acids. I have medium to high long-chain fatty acids. That can usually indicate either fat malabsorption, due to a biliary insufficiency, meaning you're not producing enough bile, or a pancreatic insufficiency. And you can start to see now how you can put the puzzle together by doing detective work. So for example, I know that I have a pancreatic insufficiency based on my levels of elastase. So that's driving up the level of long-chain fatty acids and keeping me from absorbing some of the beneficial long-chain fatty acids. So that's something that will be addressed through the use of pancreatic enzymes. High total fat, if this were high, that would mean a little bit more malabsorption of fat going on. The same thing if I had elevated fecal cholesterol. None of those two issues are going on in my case. So you can also look at basically your ability to absorb fat is what this shows. Okay, so now we get down to the kind of interesting part, the thing that shows you what pharmaceuticals and what botanicals your body is sensitive to. Now, if I had taken a high number of antibiotics in my life, I might be resistant to some of these pharmaceutical antibiotics. I'm actually sensitive to all of these, so if I were to get a pretty nasty bacterial infection or something like that, any of these antifungal agents I would be sensitive to, and they would do the trick with me. But this would be good data to know if you ever got a really serious infection, to know that if your doctor gave you, for example, like a nystatin, you might be resistant to that if you flagged R. So I don't use a lot of pharmaceuticals anyways. Those are the big guns if you got a serious issue. But I do use a lot of botanicals like oil of oregano and black walnut and stuff like that. And this is really interesting because I am resistant to certain botanicals. And what that means is that these particular antifungal agents are not going to be effective at suppressing the growth of fungi and yeast and bacteria in my digestive tract. So I know that I have a yeast and a fungus overgrowth in my digestive tract. So what I can do is choose things off the sensitivity list, like black walnut, berberine, caprylic acid, which interestingly is just like MCT oil, which I happen to have a lot of lying around because I use MCT oil in my training. Carvacrol, which is basically oil of oregano, and then quinic acid or cat's claw. And then there are certain things that I'm resistant to, like wormwood, garlic, interestingly, because I've tried to use that before for infections and things of that nature. Well, it turns out I'm resistant to it, so maybe I was wasting my time. Uva ursi, common one for urinary tract infections, I'm resistant to that. Oil of thyme, and then undacyclinic acid. I don't even know what that is, honestly. I'm not familiar with that one. So what I'm going to personally do to take care of my issue, and I talked with my doc about this, is I have the Ben Greenfield Fitness Oil of Oregano. So that's 80+% carvacrol content, really high carvacrol content. It comes from Turkey. I have more than enough bottles of that lying around. I usually do about 4 to 5 drops of that a day as just kind of a daily health tonic. I will up to 15 to 20 drops 3 times a day to get rid of and knock out this yeast and fungus issue, and this will also have an effect on the blastocystis, on the parasite as well. Same thing with caprylic acid. It's an antiviral, it's an antibacterial, and what I will start doing is when I take that oil of oregano, I'll also do my handy dandy shot of the upgraded MCT oil, and I'll link to all this stuff underneath the video. Then as far as berberine, Thorne, the company Thorne makes a really nice berberine extract, and I will take that at the same time that I take my caprylic acid and my oregano. So I'm going to use kind of a 1-2-3 combo for the next 30 days. And I'm also going to retest in about 4 to 8 weeks with this test to see what happens. Now, it's not, this particular test, I think this set me back once insurance had paid their fees. It was like around $200. So I definitely submit my receipts to insurance and everything, and they do a pretty good job covering most of the cost. But, I typically only really do a gut test about once a year, but I'm going to repeat this one again because I usually don't find this many issues going on in my gut. Thank you, international travel. I think that's it. That's the last page. Okay. So hopefully that gave you a really good idea of what you see when you do a gut test. Like I talk about gut tests on the Ben Greenfield Fitness podcast a lot, and it's one thing to kind of hear me talk about it in a podcast, another thing to kind of see what it looks like, in particular, what my gut looks like. It's definitely not perfect. So I will put links over at bengreenfieldfitness.com in the post where this video appears to some of the resources that I talked about, everything from the breath test to this test to the berberine, the oregano, the MCT oil, and some of the probiotics and the colostrum and stuff like that you can use. And then I'll also be happy to answer any comments or questions that you have underneath this video, because I know some of this stuff can be confusing or need a little bit of clarification. So I hope that was helpful, and I'm Ben from bengreenfieldfitness.com signing out.